Warriors Remembered began as a personal quest to see some of the Vietnam veteran memorials from around the country. I soon realized that I knew nothing of the magnitude of the thank you that had been paid to Vietnam veterans, mostly by Vietnam veterans, and that most Vietnam veterans were also unaware of this significant welcome home. My personal quest became a mission to photograph memorials from all 50 states and to document the struggles and dedication of those who created them. The first memorial that inspired me was Wings of an Eagle in Missoula, Montana. On the back of the boulder on the right is a small plaque that says, "It is never too late to say thank you," which became the theme for Warriors Remembered. To represent Montana, the sculptress used eagle wings to frame the fatherly angel. She leaves it to the observer whether the soldier is being saved from the horrors of the battlefield or taken to his final reward. Anyone who has ever seen combat has felt that spirit at some time on the battlefield. When I visited this memorial, I knew I had to see others. Charlie Brown, the Missoula Veteran Service Officer and Memorial Chairman, told me of another memorial right in my own backyard. San Antonio is only 200 miles from Houston, a Texas-sized backyard, so I made the trip to see Hill 881 South. The San Antonio Memorial is unique in that it depicts a specific battle in Vietnam, one of the Marine Corps hill battles near Khe Sanh in April 1967. Austin Duell was a Marine combat artist on the hill that day and remembered this scene of a Marine radio operator looking skyward for a medevac helicopter while trying to save his buddy. Several years later, as part of his art therapy, he made a small sculpture of the scene. John Baines, a Vietnam veteran Seabee, saw a photo of the model and commissioned a double life-size statue to honor warriors from San Antonio. The rain has done to the statue what no sculptor could. It has streaked the RTO's face with tears that to me represented the anguish of war. There is a third memorial that drove me to complete this journey. This is the Peace and Brotherhood Chapel in Angel Fire, New Mexico. Marine First Lieutenant David Westphal was killed in an ambush in Vietnam on May 22, 1968. Dr. and Mrs. Westphal decided to take their son's insurance money and build a lasting remembrance for him and all youth lost in the war, and for those who survive. The Peace and Brotherhood Chapel is about 28 miles northeast of Taos and was dedicated on May 22, 1971, on the third anniversary of David's death. The war would continue for another 4 years, so building a Vietnam Veterans Memorial was not a very popular idea at that time. The wall in Washington was dedicated on Veterans Day in 1982, so for over a decade before the wall, the Peace and Brotherhood Chapel was considered by many Vietnam veterans to be their national monument and was visited by many motorcycle rallies and other veteran reunions. Inside, the chapel is small and a quiet place of reflection. Dr. Westphal chose to put 13 photos on the back wall. David Westphal is in the center photo, and the other 12 fallen Vietnam veterans are rotated each month alphabetically by state. Their biographies are on the stand on the left, so visitors can know who these young men were before they were taken from us. Years later, Dr. Westphal visited the ambush site where his son was killed and discovered that 13 Marines had lost their lives as a result of that ambush. He did not know that when he chose to display 13 photographs. We can take a short tour around the country and find that each of the memorials of Warriors Remembered is unique and has its own unique story. In Ocean Springs, Mississippi, is the Mississippi Vietnam Veterans Memorial. If it looks like a Navy dry dock, that may be because one of the men on the memorial committee was a Seabee. An Australian infantryman who bought Warriors Remembered wrote me that he particularly liked this memorial because it displayed the flags of our 5 allies in the war: Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines. The entrance reveals some insight into the Vietnam War. Even years after the war, there was still some discussion on how to spell the name of the country where we fought. You will see memorials with it spelled as one word, Vietnam, two words, Vietnam, or two words hyphenated, Vietnam. The dates of the war also vary widely. We had advisors in Vietnam as early as 1955. 1958 is when our advisors were first allowed into combat with their Vietnamese counterparts. Many memorials show 1965, the date when our first combat units were introduced into the war following the August 1964 Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Some show 1973 as the end of the war because it was the date of the final withdrawal of American combat units. Most show 1975, reflecting the fall of Saigon on April 30th and the official end of the war on May 7th, 1975. The most accepted dates are 1958 to 1975. What can be said, however, is that today's media continues to get it wrong in calling Afghanistan our nation's longest war, since, unfortunately, at 17 years long, the Vietnam War still holds that distinction. You can also see a medevac helicopter appearing to be on final approach into the memorial, as if to save those it could not save on its earlier missions. What you might miss is that the names of the two pilots on the helicopter doors are also inscribed in the memorial, since they were both from Biloxi and neither returned from the war. Inside, the Memorial Committee has not only listed the names of the fallen, but where available, they have etched on granite panels a photograph of each warrior. This calls to mind that iconic book of the Vietnam War, We Were Soldiers Once, and Young. It looks very much like a high school yearbook of young men. Farther north in Roswell, Georgia, a small community just north of Atlanta, we find behind their city hall another unique memorial, the 50 Faces of War. The bas-relief has water flowing down it continuously, or, as the architect said, it is continually washed with tears. The 50 faces reflect all those affected by war: children, enemy combatants, friendly combatants, nurses, pilots, refugees, and prisoners. In the top right is the stern face of a sergeant watching over his troops, and one blank face representing those who are still missing. The coming home warrior reaches out to the young girl in the garden, and the visitor finds himself wishing that just one teardrop could bridge the gap between their fingers. That gap can represent several things. It may be the young child who lost her father in the war and will never again in this life touch his hand. Or it may be a returning veteran's inability to connect, even with those he loves, because of what he witnessed in the war. Another meaning might be of an older generation of warriors, reaching out to today's younger warriors, trying to pass on to them some of the tactical or political mistakes that were made, in hopes that they will not be repeated again. Moving on to North Carolina, we find one of a handful of states with two official state memorials, a statue on the Capitol grounds called After the Firefight, and this memorial plaza at the Thomasville Rest Stop on Interstate 85. This area is known as the brick capital of the world, so that was the material chosen for the memorial. The wall in the back has 1,624 individually inscribed bricks, one for each of the states fallen in the war. The wall faces south, so the names are never in shadow. There is a third unofficial memorial just south of the rest stop, and you will only find its story in Warriors Remembered. In 1986, the lanes of Interstate 85 were being rerouted south of Thomasville, and in the process, a large median, 300 feet wide by 3 miles long, was created. Ray Everst was a Vietnam veteran with the Highway Department. He convinced the Department of Forestry to donate 58,000 loblolly pine tree saplings, and with volunteer and contract labor, planted one loblolly pine for every warrior lost in Vietnam. This photo was taken 20 years later, and the trees are now mature. But a loblolly pine has a life expectancy of about 150 years. So long after anyone will remember why these trees were planted, there will be a living memorial along Interstate 85 south of Thomasville for every lost warrior of the Vietnam War. I'm sure you recognize this memorial. The sarcophagus holds the remains of the World War I unknown. The crypt on the left is for World War II, and the one on the right is the Korean War unknown. Do you know what is in the center crypt? On Memorial Day 1984, after a lengthy debate, an unknown from the Vietnam War was interred in that crypt. The League of Families wanted every effort expended to identify every set of remains, but Vietnam veterans wanted the recognition of having an unknown warrior from their war honored as those of previous wars. By 1998, with advances in DNA technology, the League of Families petitioned the Department of Defense to disinter the remains, and they were indeed found to be those of First Lieutenant Michael Blassie, an Air Force pilot shot down near An Loc in South Vietnam. His remains were returned to his family and are now buried in the St. Louis National Cemetery. The crypt is now empty and inscribed, "Honoring and Keeping Faith with America's Missing Servicemen, 1958 to 1975. With modern technology, it is hoped that we never again will have another unknown soldier. Many of you may have visited the Wall in Washington. Many do not realize that the Vietnam Veterans Memorial on the Mall actually has 4 parts, forming a virtual circle of healing. The 3-soldier statue honoring veterans was dedicated on Veterans Day 1984, 2 years after the Wall. Just to the left on the ground is the In Memory plaque, dedicated Veterans Day 2004, honoring those who died from the effects of the war but after the war, so their names will not appear on the wall. 300 feet further to the east is the Vietnam Women's Memorial, dedicated Veterans Day 2003, honoring all women killed in Vietnam. Many may not know that 8 military nurses have their names on the wall, but there were also 56 women in civilian roles killed in Vietnam. Completing the circle of healing is the wall itself. If you are going to visit the wall, it is best to go very early in the morning before the crowds, when you can feel the true spirit of the wall. My brother, who was also a Vietnam veteran, and I went to the wall about 6:30 on a Saturday morning. He was looking at the east wing of the wall for those who fell in Vietnam on the day that he was wounded. The rising sun was streaming directly down the east wing of the wall. Focusing on his image in the wall, I took this photo. When the film was developed, I discovered that the sun was so strong it had totally ghosted out his image where he was standing, and it was as if he had joined his fallen comrades in the wall. When you visit the wall, go early in the morning, and you can feel that spirit there. This is the Freedom Rock, and you may have seen photos of it on the internet. In 1999, when he was 19 years old, Bubba Sorensen saw the movie Saving Private Ryan. He was so impressed with the loyalty, camaraderie, and dedication of the soldiers in that movie that for Memorial Day 1999, he painted on what used to be a graffiti rock near Greenfield, Iowa, the words, "Thank you, veterans, for our freedom." To his surprise, no one painted over what he had written. In the spring of the next year, veterans approached him and said, "We really like what you did for us last year. What are you going to do this year?" Bubba realized that he now had a long-term commitment. Each year since then, in late April and early May, Bubba has repainted the entire rock with scenes from all of America's wars, except for the green helicopter, which he never paints over. In 2006, the rock took on a special significance for Vietnam veterans. That year, those on the central route of the Run for the Wall stopped in Greenfield to watch Bubba painting the rock. The Run for the Wall is a motorcycle ride each May from California to Washington, D.C., arriving just prior to Memorial Day weekend. One of the riders was carrying the ashes of his buddy, who had just died that year, to spread them at the wall. He approached Bubba to see if he could spread the ashes around the rock instead. Knowing that in early May, the wind in Iowa is always blowing about 20 miles an hour, Bubba said, "If you spread them here, they'll just blow away. But if you sprinkle some in my green paint, I will paint his ashes onto the rock." Before the group left that day, there were 8 Vietnam veterans whose ashes were painted into that helicopter. Since then, each year the central route of the Run for the Wall stops in Greenfield, and there is now a platoon of over 20 Vietnam veterans whose ashes have been painted into that helicopter. It is the only part of the rock that Bubba does not paint over every year. You may recognize this as 58,267 dog tags, one for each lost warrior of Vietnam, hung in the two-story entryway of the National Vietnam Veterans Art Museum in Chicago, Illinois. Starting at the far wall, they are hung in the same chronological order of date of death as the names appear on the wall. It took teams of 3 to 10 volunteers over a year to stamp out each dog tag with name, branch of service, and date of death. When the door downstairs is opened, the dog tag sways slightly, giving the sculpture its nickname, the Silver Cloud. One blank dog tag hangs above the rest, representing all those who have died from the effects of the war since the end of the war, honoring those whose names will never appear on the wall. This may be one of the most unique memorials of any kind anywhere in the world. It is the Kentucky Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Frankfort, Kentucky, just across the river from the state capitol you see in the background. The memorial is a 24-foot sundial set in a plaza in such a way that each hour of the sundial's path represents 1 year of the war. The architect arranged the names of Kentucky's 1,103 lost warriors in each year such that, on the date of the man's death, the point of the shadow of the sundial crosses his name. This gives each lost warrior his own personal memorial day on the date of his death. The names of those who are missing are inscribed at the base of the sundial on the south side, so the shadow never crosses their names. Truly an amazing engineering feat, as well as an amazing memorial. In 1988, when this memorial was dedicated, our best computer was probably a 386 processor, meaning that the architect's calculations were practically done by hand. On a slightly lighter note, this is the Southeast Wisconsin Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Milwaukee on the shores of Lake Michigan. To help pay for this memorial, the committee sold brick pavers for the circular plaza. Those pavers could be engraved with your name as a donor or in memory of a lost warrior. One day, the committee received an envelope with no return address. Inside was $50 in cash for a small paver, and on the order form was the name Jane Fonda. Now the committee had a dilemma. As much as they did not want Jane Fonda's name on their memorial, they had no way to return the money. So the paver was made. However, mysteriously, when the pavers were being set into the plaza, that one brick paver was laid name side down. The committee felt that it had fulfilled its obligation. I will close with this poem by George Skypack, considered to be the poet laureate of Vietnam veterans. I think it speaks clearly to those who have seen war. I was that which others did not want to be. I went where others feared to go, and did what others failed to do. I asked nothing from those who gave nothing, and reluctantly accepted the thought of eternal loneliness should I fail. I have seen the face of terror, felt the stinging cold of fear, and enjoyed the sweet taste of a moment's love. I have cried, pained, and hoped, but most of all I have lived times others would say were best forgotten. At least someday I will be able to say that I was proud of what I was, a soldier. Warriors Remembered took 6 years and 35,000 miles of travel to complete. I was able to catalog over 1,000 memorials, but I believe that there are at least that many more not on my list. The 100 memorials in Warriors Remembered are organized into 9 geographic regions, with a map showing the book's memorials in that region. My purpose was to encourage others to visit those memorials nearby to honor their fallen and surviving brothers, or in your travels, to keep you from passing by a memorial without even knowing that it was there. Each memorial story includes its exact location, so you can easily find it. If you have been touched by this presentation, I encourage you to read the other 90 equally emotional stories in Warriors Remembered, and to use it as a tour guide for memorials that you will find in your travels. You can purchase a book personally signed for you by the author on the Warriors Remembered website.